Intel, your constant admitting to defeat is almost sad at this point. It's a tad funny, of course, and it's always, of course, funny to see all the memes that come out of it, but it's almost sad seeing how many times now you had to admit defeat in front of your shareholders, resulting in some very, let's just say, roller coastery behavior of your stock prices. But we still want you to do well for the most part. But now seeing how you said that you're still struggling to get to 7nm, and you most likely get to it by 2022 or 2023, which is when supposedly AMD will be on 5nm, then we can't do much but just laugh. But does that mean that you should just jump ship from Intel to AMD? Well, that is an interesting question, because even though it's clear that they are very struggling on a technological front, that doesn't mean that they still don't have some innovations to innovate on. Because transistor size isn't everything, and if things really go downhill in a year or so, they can just, jump ship and say go with TSMC or anyone else who can work on a 7nm process. AMD doesn't have its own semiconductor foundry, they just use other partners to produce all the silicon for them, while Intel does everything in-house, so that could be a reason for all of these delays, which is weird seeing how much money they have, and yet still somehow they're unable to go down to 7nm. But that doesn't mean that the upcoming CPUs will be bad or anything. We've already seen that even though the new Intel 10th gen series of processors, even though they still use 14nm and have so many pluses at the end of it now that it looks like a typical American apparel store, but that still doesn't mean that it's not a good CPU in, well, some cases. Sure, we have seen the advantage they have in everything, productivity, gaming, everything, drop off significantly ever since Zen dropped. In productivity, they lost the lead ages ago, and in gaming, they're still just holding on for dear life. But it doesn't mean that if you're just interested in gaming, an Intel CPU is bad. And even though it's still the same technology, they still managed to make them perform faster than the 9th gen, and also make them even run cooler than the 9th gen by doing little tricks like reducing the actual size of the die underneath the IHS to improve the transfer of heat. So clearly, they still have all these little things they could do to improve on the CPUs on 14nm. And yes, even though they are still struggling with 10nm, at least they have some CPUs out there that use 10nm with their Ice Lake CPUs. So it looks like they won't be doing a jump from 14 to 7, but rather most likely they'll be using 10 sometime in between. So no, even though everyone's saying that this is the end for Intel, it's not. But we'll most likely see even more of the advantages just disappear and go to AMD instead, because they just can't, on a technological front, keep up. And remember, they're not just a CPU company, they also focus on tons of other things like server solutions and storage. So no, Intel isn't going anywhere, and just because they can't go down to 7nm doesn't mean that they won't stop innovating and creating new ways to squeeze as much performance out of the CPUs as they can. Even if it includes things like what they did with the 10 and 9 gen CPUs, where the overclocking capabilities really went downhill because they're already so close to the maximum possible performance. And that's probably a strategy I may stick with, and I'm actually planning on doing a whole video about that, so if that sounds interesting then definitely subscribe. But if they do that, then they at least get some more performance and may as well retain the advantage in gaming because of them still having a great lead in single-threaded performance. And sadly, the new XT CPUs that AMD has recently brought out haven't fixed that gap. But let me know what do you think the future holds for Intel. So I guess here's the homework. Create me in the comments your own timeline of the manufacturing nodes and when Intel will hit them. So I'm actually curious to see what you guys think of this and what kind of move Intel will make next. Be it they just focus on 10nm, maybe even 12nm, or maybe they just, again, give up their own foundries and just make a contract with someone else. And hey, if you're saving up money to buy yourself a great value Intel CPU and you're just still waiting for that, then why don't you use some of that money over on Patreon, which is going down in the video description below, as even $1 month goes a long way in helping me make way better videos and also videos on way more interesting topics. Down there you also find my Discord if you want to talk to me, others about this or whatever else really. So I guess that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, remember to subscribe, like, whatever, and I'll see you all in whatever next. Goodbye everyone, goodbye.